Welcome to Community Church Unitarian Universalist. I am your worship associate, Emma Caverly, and it is a joy to be with you today. Community Church is a progressive, open-minded, and inclusive religious community. We welcome all who are on a spiritual search for truth and meaning. Ours is a faith in action as we do the work of social justice and elevate compassion in our quest to live ethically, recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every being. Please look to your weekly email for announcements. We are delighted to welcome back to the pulpit Dr. Jim O'Neill today. He is a licensed professional counselor and a member of our community church. Welcome, Jim. At this time, I'll read our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and pay tribute to the original inhabitants of this land. The city of New Orleans is a continuation of an indigenous trade hub on the Mississippi River, known for thousands of years as Olancha. We recognize that as a result of broken treaties and involuntary removals, Native Americans were often forced from their lands. We remember and pay respect to the communities impacted by these actions. Native peoples have lived on this land since time immemorial, and the resilient voices of Native Americans remain an inseparable part of our local culture. With gratitude and honor, we acknowledge the indigenous nations that have lived and continue to thrive here. It is our custom to light a chalice, invoking hope and eternal truth to our worship. Please join us. We light this flame to offer the light of truth and love, when the Lord above and the moon and the fire of hope and now our religious education director, Cynthia Ramirez, will share her words for all ages.
Good morning, everyone. This morning, I'm going to take you to a cool place. We're going to go to the Arctic, and I thought it was appropriate. Today's story is called Kumak's Fish. My book didn't come in, so I'm just going to tell it to you. These kids are going to be talking about curiosity and trying new things. And we're going to be learning about a Unitarian. His name is Vilmar Stevenson. And he went to live with the Inuit in the Arctic. And he would have people make special things for him because he didn't eat the way that they did. And then one day his food wasn't there, so he started eating it. And he said, that's good. Boiled fish instead of fried fish or baked fish. So we're going to be eating fish today with the kids, things they've never tried. So this story is from the Inuit, and it's called Kumak's Fish. So it was spring in the Arctic, and Kumak and his family decided they were going fishing because this was a very important part of feeding everyone. So they get up, it's still that perfect time, and it's still snow on the land. It was the fish, the river was still frozen, but they could go out and fish, drill little holes and fish. So he gathered up all his children, his mother-in-law, and everybody else onto the little sleigh. So they head out to the lake, it's not a river, a lake, and they get there, it's perfect, and they have to uncover the little hole, and they get there. But most importantly, they brought his uncle's Abu's fishing stick, which he had for many years, that he carved, and it was very, very like a stick. So they go out there and they sit there most of the day, and finally, towards the end of the day, almost when the day is done, and the sun just starts to get a fish. And before they leave, got to tell the most important part, is that it's a good day for a fish. And that was, as they go, that was the mantra. So the young son brings up the fish, said, it's a good day for a fish. Goes, the wife gets one. It's a good day for the fish. And everybody's getting one. And finally, Kumak, is the amazing fishes that gets this amazing pull from the line. And he's pulling, and it's like really, really massive. Man, that must be a gigantic fish. Oh, so it's holding it, and he can't bring it in. It's just pulling, and it's moving him back and forth from the hole, and he just can't pull it up. And everybody's going, my gosh, that must be the biggest fish ever. So then everybody started to come and help me. So they're pulling him, trying to bring in the fish. And so he's moving back and forth, and then all of a sudden, everybody's on the back of him, pulling, trying to bring this fish. It must be big as a whale, they said. It's just turned. So then the village found out about this fish, and it must be the biggest one ever. So they all come, and as we were pulling, and all of a sudden, everybody from the village, everybody's holding on to one and not letting go, and pushing and pulling, and this fish, and he's holding the amazing fish stick, and he's pulling it, and then the thing's moving, and then everybody's moving, and going in a circle, and just like pulling. This must be the biggest fish ever. And then all of a sudden, it pulls, and it pulls poor Kuma into the freezing water. And the people say, no, we can't let it go, let it go. And so they pull it, one last pull, and they bring it up. And as I whoosh all of these, there was one fish on line, and then there was a line of other fish holding on to the other fish, pulling to keep him from going out of the water. And as he pulls out all these fish, not letting go, it's a trail, many, 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 many fish. And everybody's going, my God, what in the world? And they're going, yay, for the amazing fishing stick. And with all the fish, she was able to feed the whole village. And they all had a wonderful, wonderful festival, and they were excited and everything. And everybody proclaims, it's a good day for a fish. The end. We're all nice and cold now. Okay, so let's go ahead and see the children out. Up and down. Thanks.
Just imagining being in the Arctic helped a little bit, didn't it? So our first reading today is from the book, The Strange Trial of Mr. Hyde, A New Look at the Nature of Human Evil, by John Sanford, Jungian analyst. And actually, he is quoting the psychologist Fritz Kunkel. Kunkel believed the child comes into the world with innate trust and confidence in life and people. At birth, the child is naturally bold. This gives the child spontaneity, a healthy instinct to bond with people, which Kunkel calls a we feeling and a lack of negative self-consciousness. The natural condition of the child is for the ego and the self to be closely and naturally related. Out of this state of interrelatedness of ego and self comes the capacity of the child to feel a close, we feeling with the significant adults in his or her life. Being at one with himself or herself, the child is also at one with others. Sooner or later, however, this trustful we feeling is broken by the destructive egocentric behavior that is consciously or unconsciously directed by adults towards the child. When this happens, there's a separation of the ego from the self, as the nascent ego unconsciously creates a defense system to protect itself. This defense system is the basis for the egocentric formation of the adult personality. The rigidity of the egocentric adult personality and the thickness of the shell that this egocentricity puts around the real self depends on how early and how violently the original weed is shattered by the egocentric behavior of significant adults towards the child. The effects of egocentricity are profoundly destructive. Since egocentricity cuts a person off from the real self, the egocentric personality is uncreative and rigid. For creativity is the main quality of the real self. Since the posture of egocentricity is defensive, the egocentric person does not live fully, courageously, or completely. Egocentricity always gives the lie to life because it denies the expression of our true nature in its effort to protect the ego. Perhaps the most important fact is that insofar as we are egocentric, we are incapable of loving others. In our egocentricity, we can see other people only as allies to our egocentric goals or enemies to them. The capacity for love springs from the real self, from which our egocentricity has cut us off. Fortunately, most people live partly from the egocentricity and partly from the real self, which is why sometimes a person who usually behaves in a perfectly dreadful way every now and then comes through and surprises everyone with his or her creativeness and courage. In extreme cases, however, a person may be so encased in an egocentric shell as to be incapable of undertaking actions that show awareness of the feelings of others. Cut off from the real self, the person is also cut off from his or her humanity. I invite you to join in the responsive reading 579 by Frederick Douglass, entitled The Limits of Tyrants. I'll read the first part. You can join in the refrain. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are people who want crops without plowing up the ground.
They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of the waters.
This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle.
Our heart sees nothing but our life in your hand. We never did, we never will.
Find out what people will submit to, and you have found out the exact amount of injustice which will be imposed upon them.
The limits of tyrants are described by the endurance of those who may rest.
Our second reading for today is from M. Scott Peck. He's the author of The Road Less Traveled, but also the author of The People of the Lie, The Hope of Healing Human Evil. just have a few excerpts. Peck shares this dream. In my dream, children will be taught that laziness and narcissism are at the very root of all human evil. And why is this so? They will learn that each individual is of sacred importance. They will come to know that the natural tendency of the individual in a group is to forfeit his or her ethical judgment to the leader, and that this tendency should be resisted. And they will finally see it's each individual's responsibility to continually examine himself or herself for laziness and narcissism, and then to purify themselves accordingly. They will do this in the knowledge that such personal purification is required not only for the salvation of the individual soul, but for the salvation of the world. Although evil is anti-life, it is itself a form of life. If we kill those who are evil, we will become evil ourselves. We will be killed. If we attempt to deal with evil by destroying it, we will also end up destroying ourselves, spiritually, if not physically. And we're likely to take some innocent people with us as well. What to do then? Like the patient, we must begin by giving up the simple notion that we can effectively conquer evil by destroying it. But this leaves us in a sort of nihilistic vacuum. Are we to throw up our hands to regard the problem of evil as being inherently insoluble? Hardly. That would be meaningless. It is in the struggle between good and evil that life has its meaning, and in the hope that goodness can succeed. That hope is our answer. Goodness can succeed. Evil can be defeated by goodness. When we translate this, we realize what we dimly have already known. Evil can be conquered only by love. So the methodology of our assault, scientific and otherwise, on evil must be love. Please join in the hymn, number 119, Once to Every Soul and Nation.
Once to every soul and nation.
Now is our sacred time of joys and sorrows. If you are online, you may write your joys and sorrows in the comments section to be read aloud. In person, you may write them on one of the cards being passed out by our greeters, or feel free to come up to the microphone and share your joys and sorrows. Please remain seated as we sing hymn number 134, Our World is One World. Let's sing 134.
I've got a batch of them here. It's going to take a while.
We have a joy that it's Saints time again. Not sure who that's from, but I think it's probably a joy for many people. Possibly from the person wearing a Saints jersey. A sorrow from Jim, a sorrow for the suffering of the people of Maui from the devastating fire. Herb and Heidi are enjoying many museums for free in August if you belong to at least one museum. So that's a joy for them. And I know we have a few more joys coming from folks who are online. Is there anyone who wanted to come up and share one of the mic?
I have a great sorrow this morning. I lost a good friend and found out about it just as we pulled out of the driveway to go to breakfast. And his friendship goes way back to where he was a student of mine in the 9th grade. And then later on, he was a flying student of mine, and we worked together on about 4 or 5 different ratings. We later became partners in 2 different airplanes, which is about the most intimate relationship two people can have, sharing an airplane. And I think of all of you, all the things that I've shared with you and how that's bonded me with you, and how going through different adventures and good and bad things kinds of things that bond people. Anyway, Bill and I are very sad to lose this fellow. I don't think he was quite 60 years old. He very suddenly and unexpectedly died, and we're not sure what caused his death. But we're really feeling down about it this morning. So
They can read it.
I guess that's all I had to say. I just wanted to let you know how important it was to us.
Hi, everybody. It really wasn't me who put the Saints there. I have a sorrow that I'd like to try to turn into a joy if possible. I recently lost one of my closest friends who I had lost contact with and got back in contact. Jeffrey Sean Murphy and I attended Army basic training together way back in the mid-1980s. And Murph was one of these guys, really even keel, don't jump to conclusions, both sides, let's hear them out and make the best choice. And I was as tempestuous as you can possibly imagine. And I was constantly in trouble in basic training. It was him trying to bring me back from the edge. I mean, I must have done more push-ups than any man possibly considered. I don't know if anybody else was in the service. When you screwed up in basic, you did like push-ups. Well, that was one of them. There was a lot of them. The one time that I got him in more trouble than I got almost as much trouble as I got myself. We were towards the end of basic training. We were, we were trying to keep in touch, and we were talking about keeping in touch. And we had a little group of us, and I went on, of course, some of y'all know this. I went on to serve with the New Orleans Police Department for 8 years. He served with the New York Police Department for about 10 years. And we're at the end of the last week before graduation, and we had this 5 platoons, back, I don't know if they mix the platoons nowadays or not, because it's been 30-something years. I was standing next to my guys in our platoon in formation. You're not supposed to talk, you're not supposed to blink, you're not supposed to look in any direction. And about this time, I was a teenage boy, so I was 18 years old, and the females in their platoon started looking kind of good to me. This was back in those days where I was like, oh, she's cute, she's cute, she's cute. All of a sudden, their drill sergeant, who was this big, mean sucker, he was kind of goony looking, but he was mean. He comes lumbering over to me. What in the hell do you think you're looking at, Private? Without thinking about it, I said, I'm just looking at your privates, drill sergeant. I literally did 1,000 push-ups at him. 100 at a time. And poor Jeff broke up laughing, so he got dropped too. So I was like, I'll never forget you did that to me. But anyway, thank you all for letting me share that story. Day in the life of Scott.
From Charlotte Simon, say prayers and blessings for all the people in Maui. From Alicia Cook, so happy that after 10 years in public service, my student loans are finally forgiven. So much weight off my shoulders. Fantastic. I hope everyone who still has student loans will also have that experience. From Laura Miller, a joy to have the online service working again for me. We miss you, Laura. We'll see you in September. Are there any other joys and sorrows that someone would like to share? We will light 2 more candles, one for the joys still bubbling up, 2 new to share, and one for the sorrows that we cannot yet put into words. Know that we hold you in our hearts.
I'm delighted we had some humor this morning to offset the serious topic that I'm addressing today. I imagine that life was easier for we Americans when human evil was out there across the ocean in the face of Adolf Hitler and the atrocities of Nazi Germany. But human evil is all around us now, and not just in Putin's brutal attack on Ukraine, but the epidemic of gun violence. We have good reason to fear that no matter how kind and respectful we are, we may still find ourselves victims of random acts of violence. So how do we understand human evil, and what are we to do in the face of it? That's the focus of this reflection today. In Joseph Campbell's book, The Power of Myth, he talks about what happens when a people do not have a myth, a guiding story for their life. For many years in our country, the dominant myth was Christianity, with people growing up following the Ten Commandments, believing in the message, loving your neighbor as yourself, and trusting if they did, they would find eternal happiness in heaven. Part of that myth was the belief that we were the center and the pinnacle of creation, and we were obliged to subdue the earth and all its creatures for our purposes. Clearly, that myth or story is no longer viable. So what is the operative myth in our society today? It's certainly not our seventh principle that living in harmony with respect for the interdependent web of existence of which we are a part. And you might ask, so why is myth so important? Well, myth serves four functions for us. The first is the mystical, opening us up to the great mysteries in life and leading us to the experience of awe before these mysteries. The second is the cosmological function, showing us how the universe works. Third, the sociological function, supporting a certain moral order, an order clearly lacked in our world today. And myth also serves a pedagogical function, that is, teaching us how to live in this world today. Without a believable guiding myth, what happens? Well, Joseph Campbell answered that by telling us to look at the daily news of violence and disrespect for anything that anyone does not provide immediate gratification of one's impulses and desires. Pretty hard to convince inner city kids who are neglected, discriminated against, and live without hope of a satisfying existence other than poverty and minimum wage that our society will give them the opportunity to live a fulfilling life. Can we expect black youth to respect the law and police when young black men are beaten and killed by police officers after routine traffic stops? I'm afraid the myth they learn is to take whatever you can before someone else does. And that you can't trust society, the government, and certainly not the police to protect and serve you. So a lot of human evil is the endless cycle of evil begetting evil. Those who are unloved, neglected, and or abused take out their frustrations in destructive acts unless and until they find a way to transform their suffering into a life that brings healing and hope. In other words, we all have to find a story, a myth that can guide our lives. And in an American society today, who can say what our guiding myth is? But it's certainly not service of the common good for all. When asked what myth is needed for today, Joseph Campbell answered, quote, "Myths come from realizations of some kind that have then to find expression in symbolic form. And the only myth that is going to be worth thinking about in the immediate future is the one that is talking about the planet. Not the city, not these people, but the planet and everyone, and I'll add everything on it." He said, until that gets going, you don't have anything. He also commented on our vision of the Earth from space. You remember those first photos we saw? Beautiful photos of our wonderful planet. He suggested that might be a symbol of the new myth to guide us. That we are one planet, one people, and we have to find a way to live without divisions. Do you hear echoes of our 6th and 7th principles? The goal of world community, with peace, liberty, and justice for all, and respect for the interdependent web of all existence. So gratefully, we as UUs have an adequate myth, I judge, to guide our lives. But how are we to understand and address human beings? Thomas Aquinas, the brilliant philosopher and theologian, is often quoted as defining evil as the absence of good. But see, that was not his full definition. What he stated was, evil is the absence of good that ought to be there. That suggests that there's a certain ought in the universe. Simply put, the way things ought to be, and the absence of that good order is evil, missing the mark, leaving a disordered state of being. If you substitute consciousness or awareness for the word good, then evil is the absence of consciousness or awareness that ought to be there. Put another way, the absence of something that's ready for consciousness that is denied or repressed causes evil. All of us have aspects of our lives that are unlived. Some are not ready to be lived or expressed. But those aspects of our lives that are in our shadow and are ready to be made conscious but are refused or repressed are the ones that cause trouble. In our personal and collective lives, they manifest in symptoms, physical symptoms, mental symptoms, and in destructive behaviors, like the violence we see around us. In our collective lives, consciousness that is repressed can have disastrous consequences. For example, when so many deny the awareness that we as humans are making the earth uninhabitable. We are experiencing every day the consequences: droughts, flooding, increasing destructive tornadoes, hurricanes, snowstorms, pollution, poisoning of our air and water, and of course, this unrelenting heat wave. And of course, the terrible destructive fire in Maui. The good or consciousness that ought to be there is a recognition that our survival is directly linked to the health of the planet. That message is being delivered every day by Mother Earth as we watch one disaster after another. To deny the necessary care, the care that ought to be there of our Mother Earth, results in evil consequences. We suffer daily. Another example of denying reality was when Trump and his followers denied the awareness or reality that he lost the 2020 election. That denial erupted in the violent, deadly attack of an angry mob on the Capitol. The good of our democracy requires that we accept the results of an election, even if it's not what we want and personally think is the best. The denial, repression of reality takes enormous energy, and that energy seeks expression. The healthy expression could be that people get involved and work towards the next election. The unhealthy expression of it was demonstrated by the angry mob who tried to stop the certification of the 2020 election. Another factor that contributed to the evil is that it's easy for an individual in a group to pass the moral buck to another part of the group, particularly the leader. As Scott Peck put it, in this way, not only does the individual forsake his conscience, but the conscience of the group as a whole becomes so fragmented and diluted as to be non-existent. As we heard many testify in the January 6th hearing, they were following the directions of the leader, who they believed. Some realized afterwards that they had been deceived. And then, in accessing their personal conscience, regretted the evil they had participated in by attacking the Capitol. A recent example of corporate evil, I actually saw it on 60 Minutes, was exposing a scandal about eBay. A couple near Boston produces an e-commerce newsletter to inform the public. After they reported on some problems with eBay, the executives at eBay sent out messages to their security staff, which I quote, "Bring them down," and "I want ashes." And they paid for their security staff to harass and threaten this couple into silence. I won't go into the graphic details, but the couple feared for their life. They had no idea where the threat was coming from until police were able to track down one of the perpetrators to eBay. Then 7 of the security staff were convicted, but the 2 top executives who issued the orders got off scot-free. One of them with a $57 million severance. How scary, frightening, dangerous that the lack of accountability in corporations, that they make decisions that bring enormous evil, like the opioid epidemic, with the excuse that the shareholders require profit. Oh, we're just doing what our boss demands. And those with the individual courage to stand up and say no are often ostracized and fired. Now, we've all probably experienced moments when our integrity of conscience was severely tested by pressures from the group we were in. When I was in the priesthood 45 years ago, I felt pressure to support church teaching I could not in conscience embrace. One of the reasons I left. When I was in Rome during the Second Vatican Council, I saw clearly the next step the church needed to take was to welcome women into the priesthood, to make clerical celibacy optional. When a few years later it became clear to me that the male-dominated hierarchy refused to accept those necessary changes, even in the midst of what was called the sexual revolution, we know what human evil exploded in the Catholic Church. The pedophilia crisis and its cover-up is an enormous evil that caused tremendous suffering. So I can no longer be part of a hypocritical institution that claimed to be wanted to see how long it took for the awareness that all peoples are created equal to break through to our collective consciousness, to bring an end to slavery and then bring an end to discrimination. We're still struggling, aren't we, with that awareness. It's frightening to realize that just ignoring or turning our heads away gives evil its way. As Martin Luther King Jr. put it, the ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence over that by good people. So the challenge for us today is to unmask human evil and replace it with the good that is needed. Let me just mention a few examples from the more obvious to the more subtle human evil we need to root out. Of course, leaders and dictators who use their position to impose, dominate, and destroy others in the service of their own ego-aggrandizement, like Putin and Trump. White male supremacists and anarchists who vilify all who disagree with them and resort to violence to impose their will on others to the point of attempting to overthrow our democracy. Religions and religious radicals claiming to be God's chosen and saved who feel entitled are divinely appointed to judge, condemn, and even execute those who follow a different spiritual path. What about legislators who get elected promising to serve their constituents but become corrupted by special interest groups who make big contributions? There's those of us who claim equality for all, but either ignore or are complicit with discrimination against women and minorities, wages, hiring practices, and deciding who we listen to with respect. Those of us, while knowing how serious global warming is, ignore or refuse to make the changes in our lifestyle that would help the planet recover. You know, recycling, solar panels, converting to electric cars, seriously reducing fossil fuels. Now, each of you could add to that list, especially those who suffer at the hands of those who knowingly or unknowingly continue to act in self-centered ways without regard to the impact of their actions. We all know a classic story of the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That story was written after Robert Louis Stevenson woke up from a terrible nightmare where a benign, loving face morphed into a malignant, destructive face. Really scared him. So his wife said, "You need to write about that." And he did. And of course, that's the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, classic piece of literature. Now, most of us on the surface think that that's really a story about the contrast between good and evil, who we are in the daylight of our public image, and then who we are in the darkness of night when our shadow self-emerges. Well, that's true. But John Sanford, in his book that I read from earlier, revealed that the evil of Mr. Hyde is rooted in the pretense, facade, and egocentricity of Dr. Jekyll, who was completely focused on presenting an ideal image of himself to others. One definition of egocentricity is the single-minded, largely unconscious effort of the ego to defend and protect itself and to further its own ambitions. Scott Peck, in the book that I read from, describes this behavior as narcissism. when one is so egocentrically focused only on what serves them and oblivious to the needs of others, they trample on the needs of others without any awareness of the destructiveness they leave in their path. A particularly destructive form of narcissism we see in the leaders like Trump and Putin is malignant narcissism, which is, quote, characterized by an unsubmitted will. Now, all adults who are mentally healthy submit one way or another to something higher than themselves, be it God or truth or love or some other idea. The scary thing about these malignant narcissists is that their extraordinary willfulness manifests in their power to influence and control others who are attracted and seduced by them because they are so certain that they are right. This is one of the reasons that Mary Trump called her uncle the most dangerous man in America. That unsubmitted willfulness continues to be on display. Our democracy requires that we submit our wills to the will of the people, expressed by our election. Only in that submission will government of the people, by the people, for the people, survive. Now notice the theme in these human evils are willfully ignoring or repressing or denying the consciousness that is needed for a particular moment in history. If we fail to develop the awareness we need at that moment, it's needed. All of us on the planet suffers. The challenge is, I think in these days of social media, propaganda masquerading as news, it's much harder to consult the inner voice of conscience. And of course, every morning when we wake up, our ego immediately focuses on what it wants and needs to survive. It's all about us. Now that's a good thing, that we take care of ourselves and our needs. But left to our own devices, our egos would easily ignore the wants and needs of others. We would become egocentric, even narcissistic, or egomaniac. Fortunately, there are wiser and loving, caring parts of us, or the soul, that if consulted recognizes we are not the center of the universe. That part puts the ego in the passenger seat and makes decisions for the common good, following guidelines like loving neighbor as yourself. Addicts in a 12-step recovery program call that the second step, to surrender to a higher power. We youth are so fortunate that we are creating a community that's committed to set the principles that, if fully lived out, will create the ripple effect in the larger community of unmasking egocentric human ego, rooting it out and replacing it with justice, equity, and compassion in all human relations. It's an incredibly difficult challenge, isn't it? We face in confronting the human evil all around us. But it's certainly a worthwhile mission to overcome evil with the love in our hearts and our actions. I'd like to close with an image. So imagine that you are a symphony orchestra, and each of you has an instrument that you know how to play. And let's say you're warming up for performance, and everybody's tuning in their own way. It's a cacophony of discordant sound. Okay? But once all of us decide to submit our instrument to the song of love, we make beautiful music together, right? Amen. So be it. Can I have a little bit?
Unitarian Universalist is a self-sustaining congregation. Members and friends' generosity help us to do the sacred work of bringing justice, spirituality, and compassion to our community and beyond. You can give online at ccuunola.org/stewardship or by text at 504-370-2659, text GIVE. And you can give in person this morning. Someone will come around and ask me. You may remain seated, and please join us in our hymn, in our offertory hymn, number 131. Love will guide us. That's number 131.
Our benediction comes from Dorothy Day, entitled Commitment. It's number 560 in your book, but I'll read it. People say, what is the sense of our small effort? They cannot see that we must lay one brick at a time, take one step at a time. A pebble cast into the pond causes ripples that spread in all directions. Each one of our thoughts, words, and deeds is like that. No one has a right to sit down and feel hopeless. There's too much work to do. I asked Nicholas, I thought of a song that it's entitled, I Like to Teach the World to Sing in Perfect Harmony. You remember that?